So imagine you have two types of lists in your application. The first list is a list of products and the second list is a list of users. Normally the way this goes is you'll need to fetch the list of products from some API. Similarly, you'll also have to do the same for this users list. So what you'll have is three states, one for the list of items, one for the loading state and one for the error state. Next, inside a use effect, you'll make a fetch call to the respective URL to get the list of items. Then you'll conditionally render the loading state and the error state, and finally you'll return the actual list of items. This is a very typical way of rendering a list of items, but there's a better way to handle this by reusing some of the bits from these components. We can make use of a design pattern in React commonly known as the render prop pattern. So this pattern is a simple technique for sharing code between components by passing a prop whose value is a function. This function is used to determine what to render. By using a render prop, you can decouple the logic of what data or state to use from how it is rendered, making your components more reusable and easier to manage. Let me show you how we can apply this pattern over here. I'll create a common component first and I'll call it data list. So let me do that inside this components folder. Also, if you notice here, I already have a dumb component called product. So this product has like simple JSX. It takes in a prop called product, and from this product, it's rendering an image component, a title component, and some description. I also have a similar component for the users list, and it does the same thing. The structure is pretty much the same. You have an image component, a title component, and a subtitle component. So let me go back to the components folder and I'll create a new data list component. This generic component can be used to render any type of list. I'll use this component inside the app.jsx file for both the lists with the render prop. So if I go inside my app.js file, I'll use the data list component. Let me create a skeleton first. I need to import this. So now I'll pass in the render prop. So this is going to be a function and it returns JSX normally, but for now we'll keep it empty. I'll create a similar component for the products list. Now inside this data list component, again, we are going to do the same things as the products component or the users component. It will first have the values for the loading, the error and the valid states. So let me add it over here. It will also have the use effect that handles the fetching logic. We can't really hard code the API URLs here because this is a generic component. So we'll somehow need the URL dynamically for this data list component, and we can do that with the help of props. So what I'll do is I'll create a URL prop here, and this URL is going to be fed from the app component. So, and I'll just pass in the individual API URLs from both of these lists. I don't see a URL here. Maybe I forgot to add it. So let me do that as well. All right, so I have the URLs here, and while we are at it, let's also get the render prop. So this render prop again is a function that we have over here, and it's going to return some JSX. And speaking of this render prop, all we have to do at the end is simply call this render prop. It will return some JSX, and that is what we'll get here. So instead of returning a JSX just like we did in the products component or the users component, we'll get the JSX from the app component where we have used this data list component. So inside this render prop, we'll return some JSX here, and that is what gets rendered over here. So let's actually go to the render prop and define the JSX that needs to be returned. I can literally copy the JSX that we are returning from the products list and the users list. So I'll copy this entire thing and I'll return it over here. So this is going to be for the products list, and similarly for the users list, I'll copy this and paste it inside this render prop. So I will need access to the loading, the error and the actual users list. So I'll pass it inside here. Let me convert this into an object, error and users. Similarly, I'll also do the same for the product list, and instead of users, it's going to be data. So I need to replace it with data.products here, and similarly data.users. Let me save this. I'll also save the data list component, and let me pass all these three states, so data, loading and error. Now, if I go back to the browser, let me actually first comment these two out. Actually, I'll first comment the data lists and I'll run this React app. The URL, I had accidentally passed it inside this response JSON and I had like an empty string here. So this is the correct way of doing it, obviously. So we have these two lists rendered as of now. We have not yet rendered the generic list. So let's see what we have in the browser. We have the list of products and we have the list of users. Now, if I comment this out and uncomment the data lists, and if I go back and I reload this, okay, I don't have the list. Maybe, oh yeah, my bad. I need to return the result. Now we should have the list. So to summarize this pattern, what we did was modularize the data fetching part inside this data list component. We fetch the distinct data for both of the lists by passing in this URL prop. So based on this URL prop, we made the fetch request and we got the respective result. At the end, we call the render prop. That's basically a function that returns JSX with all the data that's required. The list of items, the error object, and the loading state. Inside this render prop, we render our JSX the way we want to. So yeah, that's essentially the render prop design pattern, a way for you to share code between components and decouple the state related logic and the rendering logic. There's one more way to achieve similar decoupling using custom hooks. Do let me know in the comments if you want a video around it and I'll create one. Also do subscribe to the channel and I'll see you in the next one.